Hey guys, tonight we're slipping into the flickering, candle-lit corridors of a forgotten kitchen, where iron spits creak over open fire, and the smell of scorched hair fat clings to your every breath. You're young, too young to know the difference between rosemary and rat droppings, but you've already figured out that whatever this place is, it's not where dreams are made. Your apron is too long. Your shoes are two different sizes, borrowed from a dead porter no one dared to bury during the summer heat. And the only thing louder than the butchering of pigs out back is the yelling of Chef Moreau, whose beard seems to contain its own food chain. You stir a pot of something that smells like vengeance, a mix of turnips, barley, and what you hope isn't frog spine. You've been here 3 years and never seen a carrot. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge back and forth across the cracked stone floor of the Auberge de l'Écu Noir, a roadside inn somewhere between Lyon and nothing. Your job is to stoke the flames, turn the spits, mop up the spilled blood, and occasionally chase off wild dogs gnawing at the pantry door. Your hands are stained with beetroot and ash. Your ears ring from too many pots banged too close. But still, something in you watches, learns. When the butcher slices, you memorize the angles. When Moreau yells about over-salted trout, you file away what not to do. You pretend not to care, but the truth is, you dream of flavor. Your first culinary experiment is a disaster. You try to mix dried apples into the slop, figuring why not make it sweet. The result tastes like regret and gets thrown at your head. The scullery girl laughs so hard she snorts. Historians still argue whether these backwater kitchens were truly the birthplace of rustic French cooking or just a cesspool of indigestion. But even in those smoke-stained walls, the seeds of something larger begin to take root. One day, a merchant stops by, carrying spices from the south, saffron, cloves, peppercorns. He leaves a trail of yellow dust wherever he walks. While he drinks himself into a puddle, you sneak a whiff from his pouch of cardamom. You've never smelled anything like it. It's like the idea of warmth itself. Later that night, you hide a pinch in the stew. The next morning, Moreau accuses everyone of witchcraft because the porridge doesn't taste like death for once. You keep your mouth shut and smile into the cauldron. There's a strange rhythm to this world. Everything's either boiling, rotting, or fermenting. You sleep near barrels of souring wine and sacks of questionable wheat. You've seen rats bigger than your arm. You've named 3 of them. A fringe historical theory suggests that cooks like you were more than just laborers. They were the secret taste testers of the nobility's moods. If the Duchess threw a fit, maybe it was the mutton. You don't know it yet, but this kitchen, your smoky, violent cradle, is the place you'll outgrow like a cast iron pan full of holes. It's the start of your strange journey through fires, flavors, and the back doors of history. Because one day soon, you'll be more than just a boy with soot on his face. You'll be the ghost in the sauce. It happens on a Wednesday. You remember because that's the day the local nobleman visits, and the pigs always get especially nervous. You've been promoted, sort of. After weeks of begging and one regrettable bribe involving a dried fig and a sheep's bladder, you've been allowed to help with plating. Not actual plating, mind you, just arranging food on a chunk of oak, because porcelain is for royalty and peasants eat off fear and wood. The dish? Roasted hare with garlic and wild fennel. Except no one told you that the hare had gone sour. You didn't sniff it. You were too busy trying not to drop the hot pan. So when you placed it on the nobleman's plate with trembling hands and a flourish you thought looked professional, you didn't notice the greenish hue or the faint scent of decay wafting upward like a curse. The nobleman, Baron de Valliere, takes one bite. Just one. Then his face folds like wet linen. He stands up, slowly, dramatically, like a man preparing to duel a thunderstorm. And he hurls the plate across the room. It misses your head by about a prayer. "Who dares feed me a rotting corpse?" he roars, his powdered wig askew, eyes bulging with the kind of rage only inherited wealth can produce. You consider fainting. Then you remember you haven't eaten since yesterday, and fainting requires calories. Moreau tries to calm the situation by blaming you, naturally. You're dragged forward like a war criminal. The Baron unsheaths his sword, not metaphorically. Historians still argue whether food mishaps in courtly settings actually led to duels or executions, or if this is just legend spiced up by angry cooks. But that day, it feels very real. You beg, not with words, with the most pitiful expression your malnourished face can muster. Then the Baron does something strange. He laughs. Not kindly, not warmly, but enough to stop everyone from breathing. "You've got a stupid face," he says, "but I've seen worse hands. You're lucky I drank wine first. You live." You nod. You would agree to anything at this point. You'd marry a goat if it meant keeping your fingers. And so the nobleman leaves, still fuming, but vaguely entertained by your terror. The inn erupts afterward. Moreau throws a pan at your feet and calls you a fungus in human form. You're demoted, again, back to scrubbing the grease off ceiling beams with vinegar and despair. But the damage is done, in more ways than one. Because while the hare was rancid, the fennel garnish wasn't. And a guest, not the Baron, but a passing cleric, asks about it. "What was that scent?" he says. "Strange, clean, almost like something from Rome." You mumble something about wild herbs and don't mention that you stole the idea from a hedgehog's burrow where fennel had grown beside a corpse. Long story. That night, you dream of menus. Not the kind scratched onto wood with soot, but real menus. Ink, parchment, courses. The next day, the cleric leaves behind a copper coin and a tiny scroll of parchment. A recipe, in Latin. You can't read it, but you keep it.
A quirky historical tidbit from that period. Many kitchen workers couldn't read, but they kept memory scraps, little tokens, herbs, or drawings representing flavors. You start doing the same. By week's end, your little cot is a museum of failed attempts. A dried mushroom that tastes like sadness, a bottle of spoiled goat's milk, a shard of smoked fish that smells like firewood and regret. You also discover something else. You like being blamed. Because when you're blamed, it means you had a hand in something. That's power, in a weird way. The world doesn't care about kitchen boys, but the food, oh, the food listens. And so you begin to plan, carefully, quietly, because next time you won't serve spoiled hare. Next time they'll remember your name.
You're not supposed to steal recipes. Not because of any law, there aren't any, really, but because recipes aren't written. They're whispered, held like secrets, passed from hand to hand the way a dying man clutches his last breath. So, of course, you steal one. It happens by accident at first. You're sweeping near the kitchen alcove of a traveling friar, a man who smells of honey wine and lost causes, when you see him rubbing ash into the skin of a goose. Then he drizzles it with something sticky, golden, and hums a hymn in a language you don't know. He leaves to pray. You don't. You stay, watching the goose roast until its skin turns the color of old bronze, and its smell fills the inn like incense for the damned. The friar returns. He's drunk. He falls asleep with his face in a bowl of lentils. You plate the goose. You serve it to a minor noble who weeps quietly after the first bite. You're pretty sure it's not just the wine. The friar never knows, but word spreads. The ash honey goose, as the locals start calling it, becomes a legend in exactly the way things weren't supposed to back then. It travels. Soon, monks are stopping by the inn just to taste it. One brings a loaf of dark bread as payment. Another offers to bless your ladle. You start trading food for favors. Historians still argue whether the early popularity of certain peasant dishes was due to flavor or famine. But yours, for once, is about flavor. It's your first dish, your real one. The first time something you touched didn't explode, curdle, or cause a duel. And for a moment, you dare to imagine. Maybe you're not cursed. Maybe you're not doomed to a life of scraping grease from barrels. But nothing good lasts, especially not when Moreau hears the phrase ash honey. He doesn't yell. Worse, he stares, quietly. You think you're clever, he mutters. You think the goose loves you? You say nothing. Goose relationships are complicated. Moreau tears the next bird apart with his bare hands and mutters about flavor thievery and uppity little sauce goblins. You take this as a compliment. Later that week, a monk asks you if you've ever considered Paris. The kitchens there, he says, are like cathedrals.
stained glass windows, knives sharp enough to slice through time. You nod politely, then steal his pepper pouch. That night, with your thumb burned and your feet blistered, you make the goose again, this time with pepper. It sings. Not literally, though that would be a strong marketing angle. It's in that moment, tasting the smoke, the honey, the strange, clean fire of pepper, that something inside you shifts. You realize cooking isn't just food. It's alchemy. It's taking rot and turning it into revelation. It's the only magic you'll ever get your hands on. And so you begin keeping notes. Not real ones. Again, you can't read Latin. But little drawings, symbols, scraps. A goose feather stained with ash. A sketch of a flame licking a pot. A single drop of honey sealed in wax. A fringe theory suggests that illiterate cooks in medieval France developed their own pictographic systems for recording recipes. You don't know if it's true, but you start building your own language anyway. The scullery girl, her name is Jean, and she has elbows sharper than her wit, asks why you keep bones under your pillow. You say, because bones remember things. She laughs. Then, after a moment, she doesn't. Because she's starting to believe you.
It begins, as all great stories do, with a bad decision. You steal a sack of onions. To be fair, they were barely onions, soft, sprouting, and smelling like moldy ambition. But they were yours now, and more importantly, they were portable. The friar who gave you the idea is long gone, probably traded for wine somewhere south. But his talk of Paris sticks in your mind like honey in hair, slow, persistent, and impossible to ignore. So you leave, not with ceremony, not with fanfare, just one cold morning before the coals have been stoked and Moreau's curses have had their morning stretch. You sling your sack over your shoulder, grab a dented ladle, and walk into the mist. Paris is 300 miles and several plagues away. You sleep in haystacks, barter ash goose feathers for crusts of bread, and scare off wolves by whispering old recipes like incantations. Sometimes they even listen. You arrive in the city with cracked feet, a fever, and exactly 3 teeth fewer than when you left. But Paris, oh Paris, she opens her arms like a drunk aunt at a funeral. The smell hits you first. Not perfume or roses, no. Paris smells like roasted bones, piss-soaked cobblestones, cheap wine, and, somehow, possibility. You stagger into the Rue des Marmites, the so-called Pot Street, where smoke curls from every doorway and grease stains every stone. It's here you find your first Parisian kitchen. It's less a kitchen and more a war zone with ladles. The chef is a former soldier named Durand who once stabbed a man with a fish spine. You're hired because you don't faint at the sight of boiling sheep heads, and because your ladle, though dented, looks optimistic. You learn fast. The heat is different here, controlled. There are rules, layers.
This is not about slapping a goose on fire and hoping for divine intervention. This is choreography. Durand teaches you 5 mother sauces, though he calls them his 5 ugly daughters. Each one is a universe. You stir, taste, adjust, burn your wrist, and learn. A mainstream historical fact: what we now call the mother sauces, like bechamel and velouté, began to form conceptually during this period, even if they weren't officially categorized until centuries later. You don't name your sauces. You don't even know what half of them are. But your instinct sharpens. Your palate deepens. Then, one day, you see him. A nobleman, dressed in navy silk and disdain, sipping soup like it owes him money. He glances up, grimaces. He looks familiar. It's Baron de Valliere. Yes, that Baron, Hairgate himself. You freeze, drop a ladle, burn your ankle. He doesn't recognize you, or maybe he does and decides you're too beneath him to matter. But something in you shifts again. You are not beneath anyone. You are the reason his stew doesn't taste like shoe water. You are the flavor, the fire. Later that week, you challenged Durand, not with fists, not with words, with a dish. A pigeon, slow cooked in honeyed vinegar, stuffed with chestnut mash, served atop a leak reduction stolen from your fevered dreams. Durand takes one bite, chews slowly, then grunts. Not terrible. This is the highest praise you will ever receive from him. You begin to rise. But Paris is not gentle. Competition is fierce. Chefs spy, steal, sabotage. You catch a rival pouring salt into your cream. You respond by setting his apron on fire. He never proved it was you. Historians still debate how cutthroat the culinary scene in 14th century Paris truly was, but you know, you lived it. A fringe tidbit: some cooks reportedly hired pickpockets to steal spice blends from competitors. You do not confirm or deny whether this ever applied to you. You start keeping your recipes under your mattress, wrapped in oilcloth. And every night before sleep, you whisper them to yourself like prayers, like spells, like memory. Because one day, someone will say your name. And not because you poisoned a baron, because you made them taste something new.
It starts with a knock. Not at your door, because you don't have a door, but at the rear entrance of Les Sangliers Dorés, the Golden Boar. A butcher slaps a sack of calf brains on the table and mutters, "Guilds watching, behave." That's your invitation. Not to a party, to something older, stranger, and far more dangerous, the underground brotherhood of cooks. They don't advertise. They don't wear matching hats. But every real kitchen in Paris knows about them. Men and women who've cut more fingers than bread, who whisper in spice codes and debate boiling points like theologians. You're brought in blindfolded, through cellars, through wine tunnels older than plague.
The air smells like nutmeg and smoke and something burnt. A door opens, and then light, fire, motion. The room is a hidden chamber under the old abbey, lit by hanging lanterns, lined with stone shelves of dried herbs, sealed jars, ink-stained recipe scrolls, and knives. So many knives. A man with scarred hands and a cloak made of butcher's aprons welcomes you. His name is Etienne. He has no eyebrows. You do not ask why. He hands you a spoon, not for soup, for pledge. Swear upon broth, he says. No recipe stolen, no sauce watered, no pastry rushed. You nod, you swear, you sip. The broth tastes like secrets. Mainstream historical fact. Guilds controlled much of medieval trades, including cooking, but many rogue groups operated outside the system, particularly among itinerant or rebellious chefs. You're in one now. Here, you learn the real rules. Never taste without permission. Never insult another cook's fire. And never, ever draw your paring knife unless you're ready to use it. Because here, flavor is sacred, but pride is law. You duel for saffron rights, not with swords, with stews. Your opponent? A Corsican pastry wizard named Look, who wears 4 rings and smells like almonds and ego. You win by crafting a fig compote so rich it brings a judge to tears. Look never speaks to you again. Historians still argue whether these secret culinary societies were formal or more like drunken clubs of bored cooks. You don't care. You're in. Etienne teaches you heat control, not just temperatures, but intentions. He shows you how cinnamon can disarm a critic, and how a sprig of lavender can forgive a burnt crust. You learn to mix scent and silence, to stir with rhythm, to salt like confession. A fringe tidbit from the time, some cooks believed certain ingredients had moral properties. Basil for courage, sage for clarity, cloves for seduction. You start believing too. Soon, you're not just a cook, you're an operator. You carry recipes in code stitched into your apron lining. You deliver saffron wrapped in duck fat to nobles under fake names. You meet a woman named Margot who poisons creme brulee for a living, but only targets corrupt tax collectors. You find this oddly inspiring. In time, you earn a new title among the Brotherhood. Not chef, not master, but the flame-tongued. It's a joke at first about how you talk too much and burn things just slightly. But then you make a spiced duck glaze so bold that even Etienne nods without blinking. From then on, you carry a new kind of swagger. Not arrogance, just quiet certainty. The kind that comes from knowing your broth could start wars or end them. You're still poor, still sleep on sacks of flour, but people nod when you pass. Bakers leave you gifts, a tart here, a crust there. One morning, you find a note tucked into a fresh loaf. Sauce like yours should be seen by queens. You eat the bread slowly. You smile. Because now, you're not just surviving. You're becoming.
It starts, as most culinary disasters do, with a flirtation. The queen's mistress wants something soft but scandalous. That's the exact phrase. She's bored with venison, tired of sugared almonds, says if she sees another trout in aspic, she'll run screaming into the Seine. You're not supposed to be there. You're only present because the court's main chef broke his hand during an argument with a wine barrel. So they call in someone from the Brotherhood. You arrive in borrowed shoes and a cloak that smells faintly of soup. The kitchen is a cathedral. Copper pots hang like relics, and 12 cooks orbit like terrified planets around a head steward who hasn't blinked since the reign of Charlemagne. They give you a corner. No introductions, no respect. Just a mandate. Make something the mistress will remember. So you do. You start with a reduction, a whisper of cream, a memory of veal stock, a suggestion of garlic. Then heat. You stir slowly, like unraveling a secret. You add crushed peppercorn, shavings of lemon zest, a drop of something acidic and wine-stained. What you make has no name. It's too soft to be a stew, too bold to be a soup, too delicate to be called sauce. It's like velvet punched you gently. You pour it over roasted figs and shaved game. The result looks like a scandal wearing pearls. Historians still debate when French court cuisine began to shift toward refined, sensual flavors, moving away from brute roasts and into the realm of the poetic. You like to think it was this very day. The dish is served in silence. You wait outside. 10 minutes later, a chamberlain emerges. She wants to see you. You're led into a room filled with cushions, perfume, and silk so soft it looks illegal. The mistress lounges like a cat that's just eaten a rival. She eyes you, slowly. You made that? You nod. She tastes a second bite, then smiles. Actually smiles. A rare thing in court, where expressions are usually reserved for executions. She licks her lips. Tell me, cook, can flavor be sinful? You blink. Say something about sauce being a form of confession. She laughs. Then you, my dear, are a priest. And then you faint. Right there, onto the velvet, like a true professional. When you wake, it's 3 days later. You're in a small chamber with a bed softer than your moral compass. There's a gold coin on the table and a note written in someone else's hand. Return next full moon. Bring that sauce and nothing else. You are technically under house arrest, but it's a comfortable arrest. The guards feed you meringue. Fringe historical tidbit. In some courts, chefs were treated like court jesters, beloved and feared, rewarded with gifts, and occasionally imprisoned for flavor crimes.
You return to your Brotherhood in a daze. Etienne raises a brow. You smell like cinnamon and sin. You nod. I think I invented something. The Brotherhood demands a demonstration. You remake the sauce, this time over roasted marrow and honey-glazed shallots. Silence. Spoon drops. One apprentice begins crying. Etienne calls it dangerous. You call it Wednesday. From that day on, your sauce becomes a myth. People whisper of it in markets and monasteries. Recipes are forged. One merchant claims it's made with swan tears. Another insists you crushed sapphires into it. You do nothing to correct them, because you, dear cook, have done what so few ever do. You've seduced a queen's heart with a ladle.
It starts with salt, or rather, the lack of it. One spring morning, the king raises taxes again, not on land or titles or things with too many syllables. No, he taxes salt, which, for those who don't eat gold and poetry, means you now can't preserve meat, ferment cabbage, or make soup taste like anything but betrayal. The city groans, bakers whisper, butchers curse, cooks sharpen knives. You're in the kitchen at La Fourchette Noire, your latest post, a slanted building where wine drips through the beams and mice have names. You hear the news from Margot, who arrives with a cart of eels and a look of fury. They want us to pay per pinch now, she spits. Do I look like I measure my salt by the prayer? You nod solemnly. She does not. And just like that, the bread revolt begins. You help lead it, naturally, not because you're brave, but because you're loud, and your baguette-throwing arm is excellent. Mainstream historical fact: the gabelle, France's salt tax, was one of the most hated and corrupt taxes in pre-revolutionary France, inciting riots, smuggling, and culinary rebellion. You and the Brotherhood hold secret feasts in catacombs, dishes flavored with bootleg salt, bread baked with tears and defiance. You forge a secret symbol, a crusted circle with 3 slashes etched onto loaves, marking them as part of the underground table. One night, the tax enforcers arrive, pale men with wigs too tight and shoes too clean. They demand to see the bakery's salt records. You hand them a pastry instead. It explodes with flavor, with illegal spice, with criminal undertones. They cry. One faints. The others leave in silence, unsure if they've been threatened or blessed. Historians still argue whether underground food rebellions truly occurred at this scale. But you know, you saw them happen over stew and sourdough. The Brotherhood shifts its operations to graveyards, literally. You bake at midnight beside tombs, the oven heat mingling with the cold breath of ancestors.
It's not haunted, but the ghosts seem to enjoy the brioche. A fringe tidbit from the era, it was believed bread baked near the dead rose better, having been touched by the air of those who remembered hunger. You start mixing in wild herbs, nettles, dock, violets, ingredients no one taxes. Your graveyard rye becomes a phenomenon. People pay in candles, poems, and one night, a horse. But success breeds risk. The guild begins to suspect. Moreau, yes, that Moreau, resurfaces in Paris, now head of the Butchers' Union. You lock eyes at a market. He sneers. You smirk. The cheese between you curdles slightly. You respond with a full moon feast. 40 guests, 7 illegal cheeses, salt-crusted trout arranged like a revolution. The city starts to whisper again, not just of food, but of something rising. Because bread isn't just bread, it's defiance. And flavor, when stolen from the powerful, tastes sweeter than honey. By the end of spring, you've gone from cook to culinary fugitive, and you wouldn't have it any other way.
It begins with a lie. A baron, half mad, half bored, and entirely too rich, requests a beast that no man has seen and every man will remember. You ask for clarification. He slams down a pouch of gold and says, "Make me a pig with 4 heads." You try to explain that pigs typically come with 1 head. He waves you off and mutters something about divine symmetry and impressing the Venetians. So, you do what any ambitious, slightly unhinged chef would do. You build it. First, you acquire 3 additional pig heads. Legal, debatable, ethical, certainly not. But your name is on the line, and more importantly, so is your rent. You stitch, you glaze, you roast, you smoke, you sculpt. You use tricks from the Brotherhood, from cryptic diagrams found in spice sellers' Bibles, from your own nightmares. You pipe a red wine reduction through the snouts so it bleeds when sliced. The result? Horrifying, magnificent, like something cooked during an exorcism. The banquet is held in a marble hall lit by candelabras the size of coffins. Noble guests arrive in lace and suspicion. The beast arrives on a silver cart shrouded in mist. When the cloche is lifted, there is silence. Then someone screams. Then applause. Then a woman faints into a bowl of spiced pears. Historians still debate the origins of food sculpture in medieval courts, whether it began as celebration, mockery, or hallucination. Yours, however, will become legend. Mainstream fact, medieval feasts did include edible centerpieces. Peacocks refeathered after roasting, pies with live birds, towers of molded sugar. You, of course, take it too far. A friar writes a poem about your 4-headed pig.
It includes the phrase, "hog of the apocalypse." You hang it in your kitchen. But not everyone is pleased. A bishop in attendance declares your creation an affront to divine order and accuses you of culinary heresy. You offer him a slice of the jowl. He eats it, slowly, then mutters, tender, and walks away. Margot smuggles leftover pig parts to a nearby orphanage. You carve a smaller version with 3 heads and call it the baby chimera. It becomes an instant hit among children and night terrors. A fringe tidbit. Some chefs in the 14th century believed that creating visual shock heightened the appetite. A theory modern scholars dismiss, but you have violently proven correct. Soon, nobles across the city are commissioning you for more edible miracles. You create a trout that sings with the help of a hidden windpipe, a soufflé that emits rose smoke, a lamb shaped like a harp that plays itself when cut. You are no longer just a cook. You are an illusionist, a flavor sculptor, a culinary heretic. The Brotherhood starts calling you the Beast Maker. Etienne isn't sure whether to knight you or excommunicate you. And yet, late at night, when the fire's dying and the city sleeps, you sit in your kitchen, chewing on burnt crusts, wondering, have you gone too far? Is this cooking or performance? Is this art or madness? The pig with 4 heads stares at you from memory. It does not answer. You remember the smell first. Not the usual kitchen smells, roasted fat, burning crust, wine reduced to syrup and smoke. No, this is different. This is mildew, wet stone, and the metallic tinge of fear. It's the plague. Paris is quieter now, too quiet. The clamor of carts, the screams of fishmongers, the nightly songs of drunk bakers, they're gone. Streets are scattered with wilted bouquets and chalk crosses. Whole markets are boarded up. The taverns now echo like crypts. And yet, you stay. You don't run like the nobles. You don't hide in the hills with cheese hoards and salt cellars. You stay because the Brotherhood stays. Because someone has to feed the ones who remain, especially the orphans. You start cooking at dawn when the fog still hugs the shutters. You break into abandoned pantries. You gather scraps from shuttered kitchens. You invent meals from things that were never supposed to be meals. Grass boiled with vinegar, barley stretched with wine dregs, mushroom caps stuffed with stale breadcrumbs and whispered apologies. And somehow it works. Mainstream historical fact. During the worst plague years, many cooks fled cities, and hunger became as deadly as disease. But some remained, cooking what they could for hospitals, churches, and orphan homes, especially the orphans. You start cooking at dawn when the fog still hugs the shutters. You break into abandoned pantries. You gather scraps from shuttered kitchens. You invent meals from things that were never supposed to be meals. Grass boiled with vinegar, barley stretched with wine dregs, mushroom caps stuffed with stale breadcrumbs and whispered apologies. And somehow it works. Mainstream historical fact: during the worst plague years, many cooks fled cities, and hunger became as deadly as disease. But some remained, cooking what they could for hospitals, churches, and orphan homes. You become a ghost in the alleys, a ladle in the dark. You leave bowls on steps, loaves in window cracks. No one sees you, but they start calling you Les Fantômes du Bouillon, the phantom of the broth. One night, a child leaves you a note. Your soup made my sister smile before she stopped breathing. Merci. You cry into the stock that evening, quietly. Just enough salt. The Brotherhood meets in silence now. No duels, no spice games, just plans. Etienne is pale, coughing, but still stirring. He shows you how to create a thick stew from cow bones boiled for hours with charred onion skins. Flavor, he says, lives longer than we do. You write your first full recipe down. Not just symbols this time, but words. Fractured, crooked French, scrawled with coal on the back of a wine label. Historians still argue whether early French recipe writing emerged during the plague out of necessity or preservation. For you, it's both. You call it bouillon noir, dark broth. A fringe detail: some plague survivors believed certain combinations of herbs, sage, rosemary, vinegar, could protect the soul. You add them not for safety, but for flavor. The soul will fend for itself. Margot brings you nettles. You crush them with wild garlic and spread the paste on charred bread. It tastes like the forest is whispering apologies. Word spreads. The Queen's mistress, still alive somehow, sends for that broth, even though she's fled to the countryside. You refuse, politely. The kitchen becomes a shrine. You line the shelves with pebbles from empty bakeries, corks from wine bottles no one finished. One night, a masked priest visits. He doesn't speak, just takes a spoonful of your barley root porridge, nods, and leaves 3 silver coins on the table. You use the coins to buy a donkey. Name it Farine. It helps you haul food to the river wards. You love it more than any man you've met. And then, one evening, for no reason, the sky breaks into pink and gold. You stir a pot slowly, watching the sun die over the city rooftops, and think, even in the plague, even in the stink of death and damp stone, a well-made broth still matters. The first time you try to write a full recipe, it bleeds. Not metaphorically. You slice your thumb on a shard of broken bottle you're using as a quill. You swear loudly. The donkey, Farine, brays in disapproval. You dip a scrap of cloth in the broth and wrap your hand. Then, with your other thumb smudging coal onto waxy parchment, you begin again. Bouillon noir. Bones burnt. water, too much, onion, crushed, salt, if you're lucky, thyme, all of it. This is how it begins, not with a flourish, but with blood and broth and a deep ache in your wrist. No one taught you how to write a cookbook. There are no instructions for chefs who were raised on fire and fear. But you feel the recipes, like ghosts in your knuckles. You scavenge for materials, bark, butcher paper, stained bits of linen. You write with wine, with soot, with sauce so thick it could double as ink. And you bind. Oh, how you bind. Thread from old aprons, leather straps from ruined boots, wax to seal the edges. The cover? A thick square of wood once used to chop parsley, and once a finger. You name the book La Langue du Feu, the tongue of fire. Mainstream historical fact, many of the earliest recipe books in France were handwritten, passed from kitchen to kitchen, often recorded by scribes or clerics. Some never made it past a single cook's hands. Yours is different. It hums. Etienne touches the cover and says, "She's alive." You don't ask what he means. A fringe tidbit. A few ancient texts mention living books of cuisine, manuscripts that seemed to evolve, to rewrite themselves, to resist duplication. You begin to believe yours is one of them. One night, you catch a rat chewing the corner. You hurl a spoon at it. Later, you find the rat dead, not from the spoon, but from whatever herb-stained paper it ingested. You make a note. Page 19. Do not eat raw. The Brotherhood gathers to help. Margot contributes her eel pie formula. Luke, bitter as ever, donates a liqueur recipe that smells like despair but burns clean. Even Etienne scrawls down his infamous invisible onion jam, which is more metaphor than food. You add illustrations, crooked but clear. You draw smoke, fire, hands, bones. And on one page, just one, you leave a bloody thumbprint and write beneath it, "For those who fed others while hungry." Still, it's not enough. Something's missing. Then, a visitor. He appears at dusk, cloaked, silent, eyes like old soup. He speaks Latin badly. He carries a box. Inside, scrolls, torn recipes, and a single page with a name, yours. Misspelled, of course. Joré Dufault. You ask where he got it. He points toward the Vatican and sneezes. You add the page to your book. It fits too well. That night, you dream the recipes whisper back. A wind rustles the pages. The broth thickens in your sleep. And you realize you are not writing this book. You are remembering it. They come for you at dawn. Not with swords, though that would be polite, but with parchment, wax seals, and a bishop who hasn't smiled since baptism. You are requested, he says, not invited. There is a poisoning. You grab your ladle. He raises a brow. We already have doctors. I'm not a doctor, you reply. I'm better. And so off you go. To Rome. Well, not quite Rome yet. First, a rickety cart, then a boat that leaks sarcasm, then 2 weeks of travel with a priest who believes salt is the devil's dandruff. You cook stew from dried peas and the bitterness of silence. Eventually, Rome rises before you like a broken crown, dusty, cracked, and holy in the way old bread is holy. The poisoned man is not just any man. He's Bishop Riccobello, round as a cheese wheel, infamous for his appetite and terrible manners. Now he lies bloated, pale, whispering prayers to a God that may or may not forgive under-seasoned lamb. You ask what he ate. Eels, mutters a terrified novice, prepared by a foreign cook. You examine the remnants, gelatinous, shiny, and suspiciously fragrant. You taste a bit, just enough to confirm your worst fear. Clove oil, a drop too many, common, deadly, almost elegant. Mainstream historical fact: clove oil, while used for flavoring, could be toxic in high concentrations, particularly when combined with certain fish oils. Many poisonings in medieval courts were subtle, flavor disguised as murder. You prepare the antidote: black bread soaked in milk, crushed charcoal, sage tea with raw egg. The bishop gags. He swears. He survives. Barely. But news spreads. The French cook who out-tasted poison. You are summoned again, this time not for saving, but for flavor. A cardinal requests your infamous marrow tart. A noblewoman asks for that sauce of sins she read about in a monk's letter. Someone presents you with a scroll, your own recipe smuggled across borders like holy relic. Historians still argue whether culinary contraband was real or romanticized, but you hold proof in your hand, a pie crust diagram with your initials traced in olive oil. You're furious, also flattered, also hungry. You trace the source back to Florence, where a rogue Brotherhood splinter cell has been selling your recipes under new names. Sauce du Purgatoire, beef of the unnamed. Even your bouillon noir has been rebranded, Zuppa della Notte Eterna. The nerve. You storm the kitchen like a general with a whisk. Yours is cleaner, deeper. Theirs tastes like garlic and guilt. You win, obviously. They offer a truce. You decline. You leave a note instead. Recipes are not currency. They're memory. Fringe tidbit. Some believe secret orders of chefs protected certain recipes like relics, fearing misuse or dilution. You now understand why. Back in Rome, you prepare a banquet for the very bishops who once doubted you. Eels less, poison-free. The main dish, veal braised in orange peel and vinegar with a whisper of honey and the deepest reduction you've ever dared to serve. Silence follows the first bite. Not tension, reverence. One bishop crosses himself. Another weeps into a napkin. You leave before dessert. You're not here for applause. You're here to reclaim. That night, in your rented room above a bakery that smells like heaven forgot to lock the door, you open your book. Add a page. Veal of recovery. Orange peel. Vinegar. Sins forgiven through fire. You sleep well, even with the Vatican beneath your window, because tonight you didn't just survive Rome. You seasoned it. It was supposed to be your triumph, your moment, the culmination of fire, flavor, and fatigue. A royal banquet, your royal banquet, prepared in the marble kitchens of the Château de Vincennes under golden beams and whispering servants. You were told to impress the king. No pressure, just feed the most powerful man in France without committing culinary treason. You plan every detail. The feast is a symphony. 10 courses, each more subtle than the last. Roasted quail in cherry glaze. Truffle-scented lentils shaped like coins. A pie filled with doves that actually fly out. Well, one does, the rest are symbolic. And the pièce de résistance, a soufflé. You've tested it 50 times. It rises like a blessing, scented with almond and lemon zest, its surface kissed by fire and confidence. You plate it. You bow. The king leans in. And it collapses. Not slightly, not delicately. It implodes like a tower made of cream and disappointment. The king blinks. His brow lowers. A silence spreads across the hall like spilled gravy. Then, smoke. Thin, curling, cinnamon-scented, rising from the ruins of the soufflé. And in that smoke, a shape, a message. You don't know how it happens. Maybe the sugar caramelized in just the right way. Maybe the gods of failure felt sorry for you. But everyone sees it. A fleur-de-lis, faint but shimmering, suspended above the wreckage like divine graffiti. The king leans closer. He says, dipping a spoon. Unexpected. He eats it, every bite. So do the nobles. They call it soufflé du miracle. One says it tastes like shame kissed by heaven. You accept this. Mainstream historical fact. In the late 1300s, early forms of soufflé-like desserts were served to nobility, often collapsing due to unreliable ovens. Some were salvaged with burnt sugar, wine, or cunning. You salvage yours with poetry. The next day, the court artist sketches the incident. A swirling cloud, a spoon mid-air, your stunned expression immortalized in charcoal. The Brotherhood back in Paris is split. Margot says you meant to do it. Luke says you clearly didn't. Etienne only chuckles and calls you Chef Collapse. You take it in stride, because from that one failed dish, something else rises. Your legend. Fringe tidbit. A preserved court letter mentions the cook who broke the air and revealed the lily. Scholars still argue if this refers to you or a metaphor for some royal indigestion. A week later, you're invited to return to court, not as a mere cook, but as culinary advisor to His Majesty's curiosity, which in royal terms is somewhere between jester and philosopher. You walk the halls in velvet now, with flour on your cuffs and a spoon in your pocket. Nobles ask your opinion on menus, moods, and marriage proposals. One even asks you to cater a wedding between two falcons. You say yes. The birds elope before the first course. But the soufflé still haunts you. You can't recreate it. Not the collapse, not the smoke, not the moment. And maybe that's okay. Because some dishes aren't meant to be mastered. They're meant to fail beautifully. That night, you return to your cookbook. Soufflé du miracle. Eggs, stubborn. Lemon zest. Faith, dashed. Smoke, accidental. Served with a spoon and no apologies. You underline that last part twice. Because in cooking, as in life, sometimes the thing that breaks reveals more than the thing that holds.
They come out of the shadows one by one. Not nobles, not clerics, thieves. Exiled from Paris, banished from Lyon, cast out of kitchens for crimes ranging from spice theft to unsanctioned soufflés. They find you in a vineyard just outside Dijon, where you're aging a goat cheese in a wine barrel and contemplating mortality. Cook, they say, we need a feast. You blink. For what? They shrug. To remember we're alive. So you cook, not for kings, not for bishops, for them, for pickpockets and counterfeiters, runaway brides, and disgraced spice merchants, people with calluses and secrets. You set up your kitchen in an abandoned barn with ivy growing through the rafters. The wind howls like a critic who's tasted one too many under-seasoned turnips. You light a fire. It takes 3 tries and a prayer. Then the magic begins. You roast marrow with bay leaf and thyme. You bake root pies shaped like shields. You serve duck smoked over applewood and dusted with stolen cinnamon. A girl with inked fingers brings nettle tea. A boy missing 2 toes offers contraband truffles wrapped in a sock. You don't ask. Mainstream historical fact. During periods of exile and war, traveling chefs often aligned with outlaws and entertainers, forming temporary communities that survived through shared food and fire. And this night, this feast, becomes more than food.
You watch as hardened men cry over your marrow butter pastries, as a woman with 3 daggers in her boot composes a limerick about your onion tart, as a former jailer raises a toast and says, "No king ever fed me like this." Etienne is there too, somehow, sitting beside Margot, who pretends not to like him. He raises a bowl of stew and says, "This is the first meal in months that didn't taste like memory." A fringe tidbit: one outlaw chef was known to brand his meat pies with a secret mark: 2 tiny cuts shaped like a door. You do the same. Your guests notice. They do not ask what it means. The bread is crusted with burnt rosemary. The soup is so thick it holds a spoon upright. The dessert? An accident. Charred apple, melted honey, a hint of rose water, and a sprinkle of smoke. They call it ashes of paradise. You laugh, you cry, you burn your sleeve twice. And then, near midnight, someone brings out a violin made of driftwood and tension. They dance, drunk, happy, free. You sit back, grease on your fingers, soot on your cheek, and watch as the forgotten people of the land celebrate not victory, not gold, but dinner. Historians will never write about this night. It won't make it into the gilded chronicles or the stained letters of court scribes. But to those present, it is canon. One of the thieves leans over and whispers, "You're not just a cook, you're a memory maker." And somehow that matters more than any title. You return to your book, a crusty corner, torn and wine-stained. Feast of 100 thieves. Duck with defiance. Marrow in forgiveness. Pastries still warm. Served to the undeserving, and all the better for it. Then you add, flavor does not discriminate, and neither should fire. Because in that barn, under a roof held together by spider webs and desperation, you found something even kings envy: joy.
They take your name. Not the thieves, not the nobles, not even Moreau, though you know he tried. No, the betrayal comes from someone who once stirred soup beside you. His name is Jacques Delatour, a weasel in starched linen, a kitchen apprentice who once asked you how to hold a knife, and now signs books with your sauces, your reductions, your flame-born marrow glaze. He publishes The Art of Refined Cuisine. Inside, your recipes, reworded, your techniques, rebranded, even your errors immortalized in ink as Delatour's flourish. The rage you feel isn't sharp, it's low, a deep, burning simmer that sizzles quietly under your ribs. You don't seek revenge, you do something worse. You teach. Because there's a girl, dirty fingernails, quiet as a buttered ghost, who watches you from the market stalls. She mimics how you slice onions. Once,
You catch her copying your herb ratios in chalk on the wall. Her name is Colette. She's 10. You teach her everything, not just how to cook, but how to taste, how to feel when a sauce leans too bitter or when garlic needs a lullaby. You teach her the fire doesn't listen unless you respect its rhythm. You give her your book, not all of it, a copy, stained, smudged, annotated with jokes and warnings like, "Don't stir this after heartbreak," and "Add pepper, not panic." She memorizes it, by candlelight, in silence. Mainstream historical fact, many famous male chefs of the time had anonymous or forgotten women behind their techniques, doing the daily work, stirring the pots in shadow. You refuse to let Colette become one of them. She cooks like thunder, soft thunder. At 14, she roasts a duck so tender it makes Etienne take off his hat. At 16, she invents a pear tart that hums, not literally, but close. One day, Colette says, "Shouldn't I publish these?" You hesitate, then nod. "But under your name," you say. She smiles. "Maybe under ours." Meanwhile, Delator thrives. He's invited to courts, painted in oils, served oysters with too much vinegar and no soul. You never meet him again, but years later, you pass a bakery window and see one of your pastries, your recipe, your sugar-to-burn ratio. Except the nameplate says, Delator's Cloud Puff. You laugh hard, because that day Colette is serving your original version, and her line is longer. Fringe tidbit. Some scholars believe the best recipes survive not through fame, but through the stubbornness of those who remember them properly. So you remember, and you teach others to remember. You write in your book, "The stolen sauce, cream with courage, lemon with loss, a pinch of revenge folded gently." And then at the bottom, "They can steal your name, but not your fire." That night, you sit beside the hearth with Colette, who now wears an apron dusted in flour and ambition. You hand her the last page of your book, blank. "It's yours now," you whisper. "Cook what they'll never forget." She nods. Because in the end, you didn't need a statue or a gilded plaque. You needed someone who knew the difference between your fire and his smoke.
Your hands shake now. Not from fear, not anymore, but from the quiet tremor that comes with age and memory and too many years spent near heat. You live in a crooked cottage on the edge of nowhere. The roof leaks in spring. The door creaks in E minor. Your donkey, Farine, has long since passed, but you still keep her halter hung by the hearth. There are herbs drying above the window, and onions braided like prayer beads. On the table sits your original cookbook, La Langue du Feu, its corners curled like burnt pastry, its spine cracked from too much soul. No one visits much, except collect. She's grown now, runs a kitchen in the heart of Paris. There's a sign above her door that reads, Cuisine sans nom, the nameless kitchen. She says names are for kings, flavor is for people. She brings you soup on cold nights, never the same twice. Once she brought something with elderflower and smoked carrot. You cried. She didn't ask why. She keeps your book safe. Her apprentices copy it by hand, slowly, with reverence. Each page a relic, a memory, a dish that once saved a starving child, or stopped a bishop from dying, or collapsed in front of a king and still tasted divine. Mainstream historical fact. No one truly knows who authored many of the foundational recipes in early French cuisine. The names we remember were often collectors, not creators. The fire rarely made it onto the parchment, but Colette knows. And now, so do you. A scholar came once, from Avignon, said he found a recipe deep in a Roman archive that matches one from your book. Asked if you knew a Jaurès du Feu. You just smiled. A fringe detail. The page he referenced bore a thumbprint in faded blood. He asked if it might be yours. You stirred the pot beside you and said, hard to say, but it tastes familiar. You don't cook for banquets anymore, just yourself. Maybe a passerby, a neighbor, a fox once, who refused to leave until it had 3 helpings of lamb stew. Your final recipe, written with a charcoal stub on the back of a broken drawer, is this: bitter herbs and legacy, time, ash, kindness, and the sound of something boiling just out of sight. You place the paper in the fire. Watch it curl, then vanish. The flame licks it gently. Nothing screams. It's done. Because you are not in books. You are not in titles. You are in the sauce passed between generations. You are in the whisper of nutmeg in the broth. You are in the child who tastes soup and closes her eyes. And maybe that's enough. The fire burns low now. You lean back in your creaky chair, wrapped in the gentle hush of wood settling, of thyme shifting in the breeze. Outside, the sky has turned the color of cooled embers, soft blues and dusky lavender. A spoon rests in your hand, not polished, not grand, just used. In the distance, a bell rings, or maybe a pot lid clattering. Hard to tell this late in life. You breathe in slowly, filling your lungs with the scent of broth and warm bread. You exhale like someone who no longer needs to rush, because you've fed the hungry, because you've tasted what mattered, because you've taught someone how to keep the fire alive. And really, isn't that what cooking was always about? Not fame, not perfection, just heat, memory, and care. You close your eyes, not to sleep, just to remember. The inn, the goose, the monks, the smoke, the stew, the thief who cried. You smile. It's all still there. So tonight, if you're listening from somewhere dark and quiet, let the steam rise around you. Let it carry the scent of things once loved. Let it remind you, somewhere, someone's stirring a pot, because you once taught them how. Good night, traveler. May your flavors never fade. You breathe in, slowly, filling your lungs with the scent of broth and warm bread. You exhale like someone who no longer needs to rush, because you've fed the hungry, because you've tasted what mattered, because you've taught someone how to keep the fire alive. And really, isn't that what cooking was always about? Not fame, not perfection, just heat, memory, and care. You close your eyes, not to sleep, just to remember. The inn, the goose, the monks, the smoke, the stew, the thief who cried. You smile. It's all still there. So tonight, if you're listening from somewhere dark and quiet, let the steam rise around you. Let it remind you, somewhere, someone's stirring a pot, because you once taught them how. Good night, traveler. May your flavors never fade.